Let's see. There we go. I remember the values go up, 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 and the prices go down, down, down. I could sing the whole thing for you, but another time. The next thing I know, and I really did feel like it was a replay of Abraham and Isaac, that I was now suffering for my father's commitments. He had been born in Poland, came over to America, but really wasn't observant after he met my mother. But he had this sense, going back to when he was bar mitzvahed on the Lower East Side, came over when he was 6 years old, and from Poland, and was bar mitzvahed on the Lower East Side, and he had to go to temple every Shabbos, especially the year before his bar mitzvah. So that's what I had to do. And I was ranting and raving and angry all the way. And then we got to the synagogue, Temple Beth El in Cedarhurst. We walked into the synagogue, and I looked up at the rabbi, who I found out later, his name was Edward Sandrow. And I looked at him, I saw him, and in that blink of a moment, I knew I wanted to be him. That was the call. And I never turned back. Rabbi Sandrow was a wonderful leader and scholar. I actually began to go every Shabbos. And even after my bar mitzvah and through college, I would walk him home after services. I would sit with him in his study. I would want to learn every word that I could. When I was in his study, I could inhale the books. It was that kind of an experience. He was the president of the New York Board of Rabbis, and I would drive him to his meetings. And among those meetings were meetings with Governor Nelson Rockefeller. And I would sit in on those meetings with the governor. His office was next to his New York City office was next to the Gotham Hotel on 55th Street in Manhattan. But I knew I wanted to be Rabbi Sandrow, and his picture is still in my study, facing me every day, looking at his face and other faces of other pictures in my study, wondering what he would think, what he would say. But that was the call. Against my will, I see this rabbi, and I know that's what I want to be. That same year, I was in New York City visiting my father's office, then walking down Fifth Avenue into a beautiful bookstore that some of you might remember, Scribner's on Fifth Avenue. It was beautiful. There was woodwork, and it was like a library. And I wandered upstairs, and unbeknownst to me at the time, that was the first edition of Elie Wiesel's memoir, Night. There it was on a book cart, the Judaica section, because back then, and I might be telescoping a little bit, 1959 or so, there wasn't a great deal of Judaica in print. You couldn't buy it. But there's the first edition of Elie Wiesel's Night. And I take it home and I read it and reread it over and over again, almost memorizing it, captured by its words, by its story. It wasn't that many years later, the late 1960s, that Elie Wiesel started to speak at the 92nd Street Y. And I was there. And I started to go to all of his lectures, 4 lectures every October and November. And he would speak year after year. And it was the way he told his stories. I wanted to tell stories like Elie Wiesel. He began every lecture with a story. That's where it comes from. I started in the last row at the 92nd Street Y, and having gone for so many years, ended up sitting right next to his wife, Marion, and continued to go. for decades to hear him speak. Some members of the synagogue went with me. I was able, when my son Eli was born, to tell Elie Wiesel and Marion that we had named Eli in his honor, according to Sephardic tradition. The Sephardic Jews name their children in honor of those who are living, not as we do in the Ashkenazic tradition, in memory of someone. And I was able 20 years later to introduce my Eli to his Eli. And Marion Wiesel pinched my cheek and she said to me, if you were my rabbi, I'd come to shul every Shabbos. And Elie Wiesel shook his hand and said, well, not exactly. To this day, I hear his voice every time I tell a story, every time I say to you a story. The third event that happened when I was 12 is that Rabbi Sandro sent me to Camp Ramah, the Hebrew-speaking camps of the conservative movement. I walked into that camp, into what was a Jewish homeland in the diaspora. The late Rabbi David McGillner was the camp director. And camp filled with Hebrew language and prayers and songs and warmth and community. And I knew that I wanted to take the leadership of Rabbi Sandro and the storytelling of Elie Wiesel, and I wanted to take it and become a camp director. And I want you to know that through rabbinical school, I was being trained. I was 20 years at Camp Ramah. I was supposed to be a camp director when, by chance, I met the previous rabbi, Rabbi Jack Bemperat of Temple Beth Shalom. He was a scholar in residence, and he said to me, Eddie, I think you should go to Temple Beth Shalom in Hastings. I'm leaving. I think you would love the synagogue. And I told him I was going to be a camp director. I was going to direct Camp Ramah in the Poconos. And he said to me, go meet the people. And I came up and I met the search committee and spent time wandering around with the members of the synagogue. And I decided at that moment that I would become rabbi of Temple Beth Shalom, but that I would conduct it like a camp. I've been wearing the mask of a rabbi all these years. I am really your camp director. And you have all been my campers. The board is my bunk. I shall not fear. And that context is the way I feel we have set the tone for our synagogue life. The religious school teachers, I think of them and as bunk counselors. How would they be in the bunk? If they'd be good bunk counselors, then they can teach Hebrew school. Because it's not a matter of Jewish education alone. What this has to do with is Jewish identity. And this brings me to what I want to say to you tonight. There's a story about Jacob. It's the same Jacob I spoke to you about before, earlier in his life. He is fleeing from his brother Esau. And he stops in a wooded area because the sun has set. He stops for the night. And he puts his head on a stone. And he has the dream that you are all so familiar with. And he wakes up in the morning and he says, Ma nora hamakom hazeh. How awesome is this place, this woods, because this is nothing other than a house of God. And I was unaware of it. Jacob, in the middle of a wooded area, goes to sleep for the night and realizes that this is a house of God. Our synagogue was a woods not long before I arrived, founded in 1965. There was a multi-purpose room in a house, but it was largely a wooded area before we built the new building in the 1990s. And I, like Jacob, it says in the Torah, Vayifga b'makom, he was on the run and he stumbled upon the place. And I stumbled upon the place. And today we have new Jews coming up from the Holy Land of Brooklyn and stumbling upon this place. Ma norah hamakom hazeh. How awesome is this place? You know, the late Abraham Heschel said, we live for moments of radical amazement. What radical amazement we should have that we have this synagogue and this community. The late Lewis Thomas, the president of Sloan Kettering, said that the odds of any one of us seeing the light of day is so minuscule that each one of us should live in a constant state of surprise. That's how we should feel about our Jewish community. This is our synagogue, for us, an immersive experience. Listen to those words, an immersive experience. We pray, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Lord our God, you have commanded us la'asok, to immerse ourselves in the study of Torah. For all of us to feel the way I did in that study with Rabbi Sandrow. I recognized it once again this summer. Probably many of you, or some of you, went to the immersive experience of the Van Gogh exhibit. Did you go there? How many of you? Nod your heads. Well, first of all, what was great about it was only 30 minutes. And it might have been a shallow art experience, but it enveloped you. And they had a gift shop. And so you could buy stuff. You had sunflowers, you had mugs, you had posters, but you had all this music and light. And I was sitting there in that immersive experience, and I said, you know, this is what shul is supposed to be like. This is what Temple Beth Shalom is supposed to be like. Yehudi Amichai, I mentioned him before, wrote this poem about a tallis. Listen to this. Whoever wrapped in a tallis in one's youth will never forget taking it out of the soft sack, opening it up, spreading it, kissing it along the borders, a great sweep over the head, like the heavens, like a chuppah, like a parachute. Afterwards, folding it around one's head as if playing hide and seek, and then wrapping the body in it, letting it fold you like a cocoon. When you wrap yourself in a tallis, you can't forget coming out of a swimming pool or the sea and being wrapped up in a gray towel, casting it over one's head and wrapping in it tight, and shivering a little and laughing and blessing. If you haven't put on a tallis, you do know the feeling of throwing a towel over yourself when you get out of the water. That feeling, that immersive experience. For those of you who, when you were children, were able to stand under the tallis of your grandfather or your father in shul, la'asok b'divrei Torah, the intimacy of that experience. There's a Hasidic tradition. At the moment during the year when we read Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, the parting of the Red Sea and the Israelites walking through the sea, in the Hasidic tradition, the Rebbe takes a Torah and goes down from the bima, and the Hasidim start dancing in such a way that they are like the waves of the sea. And the Rebbe walks through the waters with the Torah, and they sing Shirat Hayam. What a beautiful tradition. Envision that, a dance. A Rebbe dancing with the Torah, the children of Israel, creating waves and openings for the Rebbe to dance. That's what I hope your experience of Temple Beth Shalom is. Your life cycle events, when you've had children, or bar mitzvahs, or bat mitzvahs, or weddings, or memorial services, to feel that the community is enveloping you, that you're having that kind of an immersive experience. Next year, there'll be a new rabbi here at Temple Beth Shalom. You should really be looking for a camp director disguised as a rabbi. But that rabbi symbolically will take one of our Torahs and walk with it among our people. And you will make the waves, you will make the spaces. We have 3 Torahs in the Ark. Let me remind you about them. The first one, which was here when I arrived, is a Torah that survived the Holocaust, one of the saved Torahs, which has been given to us in perpetuity, on loan, for eternity, for us to read it and to study it. The second Torah is a Torah that I had written in honor and in memory of my family. I presented it to the congregation at my 40th anniversary. The scribe, at the completion of the Torah, takes letters from the names of the people who were present then in my family and the names of those who had died, and finishes the Torah by taking the letters of their names and filling it in where it's appropriate in those verses. The third Torah is a Torah that is called in Hebrew pasul, which really means it cannot be used. It's broken. It's not a kosher Torah. The letters have cracked. And once the letters have cracked to the point where a scribe can't correct them, the Torah can no longer be read. This was a Torah that a scribe had where he put together a complete Torah of remnants of other Torahs. It is not supposed to be read in the synagogue because it's broken, it's shattered, it's imperfect. And yet to me, it is a holy Torah, and we do read from it, and our students study from it, because this is symbolic of the letters returning to the parchment, a Holocaust Torah, a family Torah, a Torah that's broken and shattered. So stories from the past, stories from the present. I promised a story for the future, and here it is. I give you a gift, a story. A chassid is wandering through Poland and decides to stay at a certain inn that he sees in the distance. And the innkeeper gives him a room, and it's nighttime and he wants to go to sleep. But there's a clock on the mantle, and the clock is ticking. And it's ticking in a very strange way. He's never heard a clock tick like that. And he can't sleep all night. He's walking up and down the room, sleepless. And the next morning he goes to the innkeeper and he says, "Where did you get that clock?" And the innkeeper says, "Well, there was another chassid who came here and he couldn't pay the bill. But he said he had a clock that was given to him by his Rebbe." And he said the name of the Rebbe. And he said, "I'm going to give you this clock in place of money for the room." And so I took the clock and I put it on the mantle. And the chassid said to him, "Aha, now I know why I couldn't sleep. All other clocks tick from the past to the present. This clock, given by this Rebbe, is a clock that ticks from the present to the future. It keeps us awake. It tells us to heal the world, to repair the world, to bring the letters back to the parchment, to teach our children about harmony and peace. there is little time to sleep. I present to all of you tonight that story, that clock that ticks to the future.
So usually after the rabbi's Erev Rosh Hashanah sermon, we have a song, and tonight is no different. But we have a very special song for you, a song that has never been heard before in public. It is a world premiere. Rosh Hashanah celebrates, among other things, the birthday of the world. And on Wednesday, in the Reformed Jewish tradition, the Torah portion is taken from the very beginning of our Torah, Bereshit, meaning in the beginning or at the creation. And tonight we also celebrate the tenure of our choir director, Linda Moot. For the past 23 years, Linda has been at the helm of our Temple Beth Shalom choir and almost everything else. She has programmed and led so many of our musical events over the years, from yearly choir concerts to klezmer, singen and spielen, to Yom HaShoah and Kristallnacht commemorations, to Hanukkah celebrations and civil rights programs. Linda has developed programs for our older adults and for our very youngest, under 2-year-olds. She's an active part of our Social Action Committee, and she has, of course, deftly directed and conducted our choir through each year's High Holy Day services. What you might not know, because, well, when is the last time you heard our choir live and in person, is that Linda retired from her position as choir director this year. And the rabbi and I decided that it just would not do to have Linda disappear from our collective view without calling attention to just how meaningful her contributions have been to Temple Beth Shalom. And so we decided to celebrate her by commissioning a choral piece in her honor, written by one of her favorite composers, Elliot Z. Levine, whose pieces are some of our choir's staples. I suggested to Elliot that he compose a piece based on one of the Psalms, which begins something like, "For the conductor, all praise to her. She has guided us well," or words to that effect. Well, she wouldn't have it. Linda did not want praise. She wanted social action. She wanted to take this moment and make a statement about how humans have literally a God-given creation. And while occasionally we wax rhapsodic about it, we don't take care of it very well. But ultimately, hopefully, we will recognize that we are partners with God in this creation and will work for its repair so that all the heavens and earth can once again rejoice. And that is the piece which Elliot wrote. That is its trajectory. Listen for the highs and lows in the music, and I will put the translation of the Hebrew lyrics in the chat. And so here it is for our conductor, Linda, from her grateful choir and beyond. Here is the world premiere of At the Creation by Elliot Z. Levine. Linda, from her grateful choir and beyond. Here is the world premiere. Hang on just a second. Creation by Elliot. Stop sharing again. And okay. I just want to make sure that I don't interfere with the other recording going on. Let's see. Oh. Okay. Linda, from her grateful choir and beyond. Okay. Here is the world premiere. Hang on just a